Hey guys, it's Eric, owner of Farpoint Farms, and today we'll be doing a how-to video. How to replace the distributor cap, distributor rotor, and spark plug wires and spark plugs if you so choose on Volvo's 1993 to 1998 Volvo 850 sedan and wagon, turbo and non, or S and V70 or S and V70 cross country. Again, turbo or non-turbo, doesn't matter. It's a really simple project. Now, if you take this car to the dealership with a misfire and it ends up needing these parts, you're looking at around $500 for quality, genuine parts, and I do recommend you use them. And if you do it yourself, you can be in this for about $120. And it'll only take maybe an hour of your life and a little bit of time on the internet to hunt down the proper parts. So let's go into the garage. I'll show you the tools you're going to need and the parts you should order, and we'll get started. So here's the parts I'm going to replace in today, except for one. I've got an extra one on the table, but I just want to show you. I'm using genuine Bosch cap and rotor, and it's very important that you use a genuine Bosch cap and rotor. And I'm using bogey cord plug wires, and again, it's also very important that you try to find a set of bogey cord wires, because they're what's came from the factory, and Volvo likes factory stuff for sure. Now, also in this picture you'll see is a set of 5 Bosch spark plugs. Those came with the kit that I ordered. I'm not going to be using those. I'll just set them aside. Generally speaking, I like to get genuine OEM Volvo plugs when working on these things. If you don't get Volvo plugs, that's fine too. Try to either get Bosch or Denso spark plugs, and be aware that turbo and non-turbo spark plugs are different. So doing this job's not all that hard, and let's take a look at the tools I'm going to be using. Okay, so you're going to need a long screwdriver or an 8mm socket with a long extension. You may need a magnet, and you're either going to use, I'm going to be using a 3/8 ratchet and an extension with a T27 Torx bit on it, and then I'll need an Allen wrench in order to get loose the rotor button. I think it's a 4mm, but I can't see the writing on the Allen wrench to verify that. If memory serves, it's either a 4 or a 5. I think it's a 4. Now, if you don't have a T27 Torx socket or bit like that, and you don't have anything that'll work, and you have the original toolkit that came with your Volvo, you'll have a T27 or a T30 in there, because it came with the screwdriver kit. So you can actually take those bits off to get at the spark plugs with that. Now, if you're going to be doing your spark plug, you'll also need a spark plug wrench, or socket, I mean, and that's what I have this magnet for. If I was going to be getting the plugs out, if one of them stuck down the bottom, you drip it down and then you can pull it out of the spark plug hole. But for me, that's all I'm going to need. And let's go outside before the snow starts picking up again and get her done. Alright, so here we are at your engine compartment. Now, it doesn't matter if your car is a turbo or a non-turbo. Anytime there's a difference between the two, I'll let you know. It's a little more difficult with a turbo because you've got that turbo pipe in the way. And some people will take it off. I choose just to leave it in place and kind of snake the wires around it. Personal preference there. But let's go ahead and dig in. And the first thing you want to do is remove your fresh air tube, and if your car has an air pump, to pull that line loose as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just pull these out and set them aside. Next, I'm going to want to unplug my air mass meter plug, and then I'm missing the clamp here, but if you had the clamp on it, you would loosen it up with a flat blade screwdriver and then pop that off, like so. The next thing you're going to want to do is remove the coil wire from the coil. And then it's just a matter of popping this box up off of its little tabs that it sits on, and then wiggling it out, like so. Certainly a good time to check the air filter, that sort of thing. I've already gone ahead and done that, so we'll just set that aside for now. Okay, now we have pretty much wide open access to where the distributor lives, which is right under here. Now again, you can either use an 8mm or a flat blade screwdriver. I'm going to use a flat blade screwdriver. I am going to undo the other end of the coil wire, which is actually where the problem was on mine. This coil, it's a Bosch wire set, which is generally speaking good quality parts. But in this instance, Bosch is not correct, and that's where the failure came. These are supposed to have detent springs that hold these things in place. This one was missing it on both sides, and it caused the wire to arc, and eventually it burned through and started arcing to other cylinders. So unfortunate, but that's exactly what happened there. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the 3 screws here. Now the third one is underneath. Sometimes you have to guide it in with your finger. Get to it and just break it loose. And that's it. Cap is a little sticky usually. You can just take that out. I'll go ahead and remove the plug wires. Yeah, and we'll get a picture of it up close, but the damage is fairly clear here. It's actually melted this electrode. It's burned a hole through the side and it's just arcing out. So that cap that's a shame too. It's made in, it doesn't have a date code on it. Some of them do, but inside's fairly clear. But either way, it's ruined because of the damage there. And again, here's a nice close-up picture of that damage from both angles there. So that actually caused me to have problems getting home the other night. And by problems, I mean it did not want to come home the other night. Luckily, I was able to nurse it to the driveway, and then we towed it up the property to the house. But by the end of that journey, which is 17 miles, I was running on 2 cylinders, so we'll just leave it at that. Now, you know, I got the kit. There's no sense in replacing the distributor without replacing the rotor button at the same time. So you're going to use your Allen wrench, and again, I think, oh, maybe in the sunlight I can read it. It almost looks like 2 or 3. Guys, I'm sorry I don't have an answer for you on that, but it's my eyesight's just not that good anymore. I'll go ahead and break these loose, and again, if this is a non-turbo car, this you can get right too. This turbo pipe being in the way makes it a little more difficult. Okay, let me get the camera a little closer in. Okay, hopefully you can see this a little clearer, but there's your rotor button. And again, don't worry about its position. It'll only go back in one direction, so that's kind of a nice feature. Now that I've broken those loose, I'll just go ahead and remove them. And again, this rotor button is not bad shape. Usually a Bosch cap and rotor will last 150 to 180,000 miles on these cars. This one failed because of the spark plug wires, which is why I can't stress enough that you should be using genuine parts. Bogie cord wires, Bosch cap and rotor, original Volvo plugs if you can get them. If not, Denso or Bosch only on that, okay? I've got that off. I'll go ahead and set that aside. That's in pretty good shape. I might hang on to that as a spare, although I doubt I will ever use it. And we're already putting stuff back together again. So here is my replacement rotor button. And you'll see right here there's a little tab. See that? That's going to ensure that I can't put this on in an incorrect fashion. You see, if I try to line it up there, it doesn't want to line up, or over here. But when I get it to the right position, it'll go right in. Then same as before, I'm going to want to tighten those down a little bit. So I'll use the leverage portion of this just to give them a little half crank. You don't want to go crazy, but you wouldn't want this coming loose while driving. It would cause damage to the inside of the cap. Okay, and we're done with that. Now we can put this back on, which is just your dust shield. It has an O-ring around it. If you can, please be sure to reuse that. It helps keep moisture out. And if it keeps moisture out of that distributor, and moisture causes misfires. All right, let me get the camera back up to full height. We're going to go ahead and take off the spark plug cover, and that won't take any time either. Okay, so here's our spark plug cover, and like I said, it's a T27, T30 will also work. And if you don't have a socket or ratcheting set like that, don't worry about it. You can also use the screwdriver that came with your Volvo toolkit, which is pretty neat. I don't think modern cars really do the toolkit thing anymore, but Volvo was still doing it. This is a 98 model, last year for this, so at least up to that point they were. Just 6 screws here. Again, if it's a non-turbo, it's going to be a little easier because you don't have the pipe in the way. But If you do have the pipe in the way, again, you don't have to take that pipe off or even loose. This can be done by working around it. Once you got all 6 bolts out, lift up on it, and slide forward, and that exposes all of your wires. Now, here's a little tip from a mechanic. If you pull this off and you start pulling these plug wires out, and any one of these holes are filled with oil, this is not like most cars where your valve cover would be leaking and you'd have seals here. This actually is not a valve cover in the traditional sense. It's more of a rocker box. It holds the top of the camshafts in place. So any oil you see here, and there is some, is caused by something else. And that would usually be the oil cap gasket, which never gets changed. You can get these for about $1, but when you take it to a place to get the oil changed, no one's going to have these in stock other than the dealership, and half the time they're going to forget about them too. So what I'm going to do here is just go ahead and pull up my plugs. Now if you do have a cylinder that's full of oil, you definitely want to clean that out, because these wires are not designed to put up with that. They'll get swollen and they'll fail down in there, and you'll get arcing just like I got here. So there's my wires set. I'll go ahead and set those to the side. These are garbage, so just toss those on the ground. I'm looking into each of my cylinder holes and everything looks good, so that's good. I do need to replace that cap, it looks like, but it's not an emergency, which is nice. If you were going to be replacing your spark plugs, obviously now is when you would do it. You would use that with your spark plug wrench, unscrew these. If your spark plug socket doesn't have the rubber at the bottom, just take a little hand magnet, drop it down in there, take your plug out, and put your new one in reverse. So we're going to skip to the next step, which is of course putting this thing back together again. And that's with my new wire set here. Now what I like to do to make life a little easier is I'll go ahead and install these before I go ahead and reinstall them into the car. Now if you look closely at this picture here, you can see that the Bosch caps are numbered, 1 being the longest wire and 5 being the shortest, and your center wire being the coil wire. So give me a second, I'll go ahead and line these up. But again, number 1 wire is going to be your longest wire, farthest away from the distributor, and number 5 is going to be your shortest. Show on this last one, you can see here these wires being different than most, is it has that detent spring there. And you'll listen when I put this on. Ready? Listen for the click. If you don't hear that click, something's gone wrong. You need to pull it off and do it again. Again, if you're using aftermarket wires, that's not going to happen. You're not going to hear that noise. And that's what causes premature failure. In fact, I've seen cars with 16,000 miles on a new cap and rotor and wires when they're aftermarket. So it's a few extra bucks, but it's totally worth getting genuine parts in this instance. Anyway, that is it. We are back together. As you can see, the wires kind of lead themselves. They're held in place with this clip here, which is good, and they just kind of do their thing. So we're going to go ahead and slide this back in. Now, again, if this was a non-turbo, it'd be a little easier, but just hang in there and watch what I do. Okay, there's a couple different ways to go about this, but I always found this is the easiest. So I'm going to snake, because this is a turbo, this line back through here. And I'm just going to get my 5 wires up through this hole here. Another way to do it is to take this bolt loose, pull up on this, or take one side of this hose loose, and then you can lay the wires flat and snake the distributor down through the hole. Like I said, there's no right or wrong way to do this at this point. It's just a matter of getting it back into place. And once all the wires are up through here, it can be a little stiff, but move that down and kind of snake it down underneath until it sits back into its official hole. And then you start putting your wires back into place. Number 5 being the hardest. Once they're lined up, go ahead and sink your boots back onto your plugs. Again, you should hear a pretty good sound, hopefully. Let's see if you can hear it. That kind of suctioning sound. That just means you're getting a good seal. Moisture's not going to get in there. Okay, and then we'll kind of guide the wires into place. That little bracket's going to go down like so. That's it. It's pretty much where you want it. It's your choice. I'll go ahead and put my cover back on now. You can do this before you finish tightening the distributor or after. Again, there's more than one way to get this job done. I'll go ahead and set these in place. Start my screws. These screws can be a little hard to find, so if you do have one roll off into the abyss, get that magnet and a flashlight out. Try to track it down. You can do without even having this cover on, but it does help with moisture. So for that reason alone, I would recommend you try to keep it if you can. Okay, so the plug wires are back in, and the plugs have been replaced if that's what you're choosing to do. Now it's just a matter of tightening back down that distributor. So let me change the camera angle again. It can be a little hard to see here, but I'll go ahead and get that tightened down. Again, an 8mm wrench or a flat blade screwdriver will take care of this. And you want these to be snug. You obviously don't want them so snug that you crack something, but you want them snug enough that moisture doesn't get down in here. That's the big enemy of ignition systems. Moisture or high resistance. And that bottom one can be a bit of a trick, but usually if you feel around, you could use a mirror. Okay, those are tight, your wires are back in place. Getting there. So the next thing we're going to do, I've got my coil wire laid over here, as you can see. I'm just going to leave it off to the side. I'm going to go ahead and reinstall my air box and hook up whatever lines have popped off. Here's one that's fallen off. You want to make sure that, or you'll get check engine lights for various problems. So let me go ahead and put the box back in. Okay, here's our air box. If you were going to replace your air filter, now's a great time to do it. If not, we'll go ahead and reinstall. And it's just a matter of kind of moving things out of the way and snaking things back into place. Again, I don't know how many times I can say this. If it was a non-turbo, it would be a little bit easier. But either way, this is not a difficult job, I promise. Okay. Now once that's sitting back down in there, got some hoses to hook back up, so let's go ahead and get that hose on there. If you had a clamp, now would be the time to retighten it. Mine has disappeared. And make sure to hook up those loose hoses like this one here. Same thing here, we're going to reinstall our air mass meter plug. I'm going to reinstall my air pump hose. And the last thing I have is my kind of mangled but still functional cold air intake. Go ahead and slide that down in there. That's it. The one last thing you have to do is get your coil wire plugged in. Now snake that down underneath the fresh air hose. I like to do this afterwards just because it's kind of short. It's a little hard to work around. There is a spot here on the back by your air box that holds that in place. So go ahead and put that in there. And again, you're listening for that snap. That nice snap like that. Get that down in there. That on there like so. hose popped off again. Guess what, ladies and gentlemen? We're done. It's time to start the car. See if there's any air leaks. Make sure there's no misfire. If there's a misfire, don't worry, it's not the end of the world. These cars are not difficult to work on. You probably got a wire crossed, or you may have a bad spark plug. Chances are highly unlikely, if you used Bosch parts, that you have a cap and rotor problem. Let's fire it up. Well, what do you know? Smooth as a kitten, good as new. I'm Eric, owner of Farpoint Farms. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope that there's probably not too many of these cars floating around the roads anymore. But if you got one and you're having a misfire issue or your check engine light's flashing, this is going to get you right back on track. Take care.